Hey, good morning, everybody. I hope you all are doing exceptionally well today. I went out to pick up my anxiety prescription the other day, and, well, with or without insurance, it can be pricey. However, the past 2 times I've gone, they've given me a Make-A-Wish discount, and I don't know how to feel about that. Of course, I appreciate the money saved, but couldn't you call it something else? Anything else? Big strong man discount, maybe a little bit more geared towards me. I don't know. Oh, on an equally odd note, the dumpster has been so hot lately. Every day I go out and there are a whole slew of new old treasures to sort through. Just to be clear, I'm not actually dumpster diving. There's an area behind the dumpsters for people to put things that they don't want anymore but don't want to throw away. It's a free pile. I could have just said that. This week, I happened to get 2 brand new, still packaged travel organizers, one for me and one for my sweet and helpless little brother. I got 3 new cookbooks, 2 large, fancy framed art pieces, and something else. Oh, and a footstool. King of the castle. It has been some good pickings. But enough about me. Today is all about Australian outlaw Ned Kelly. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. As I often do, I forgot to explicitly write down my sources. I know I used Britannica, a bunch of Wikipedia, and the rest I will put down below. Ned Kelly may be the first ever documented case of a glow-up. Please look this man up. I thought I was staring at 2 different people. He went from some pale Shrek with a stringy unibrow to the Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man in the world. A complete 180. Ned Kelly was born in the then British colony of Victoria, Australia, as the third of 8 children to Irish parents. His father, a transported convict, died shortly after serving a 6-month prison sentence, leaving Ned, then age 12, as the oldest male of the house. I've mentioned before how, instead of serving prison time or receiving a death sentence, many European criminals would often opt for transportation, or essentially banishment from their country. And Australia was the largest importer of these working criminals. Ned's father, John, was born in 1820 in Ireland. At the age of 21, he was found guilty of stealing 2 pegs and was transported on the prison ship Prince Regent, arriving at Hobart in Tasmania on January 2nd of 1842. According to Wikipedia, on November 18th of 1850, he married Miss Ellen Quinn, his employer's daughter. The couple subsequently turned their attention to gold digging and earned enough to buy a small house in Beveridge, just north of Melbourne. Here, the couple had their 8 whole children before again moving in 1864 to Avenel, 100 miles north of Melbourne. And the Kellys, they did not prosper here. The father, John Kelly, was drinking heavily at this point, and the police would be at their house basically weekly, much too often for little disturbances, petty theft. However, here in Avenel, Ned found his love for the bush. And I mean that, like the wilderness bush, Mom. Finally, in 1867, the family settled in Greta, near northeastern Victoria, close to the Quinn family and their relatives by marriage, the Lloyds. Here is where Ned would officially start his life of bushranging. According to Britannica, a bushranger was a criminal in the Australian outback, or bush, in the late 1700s and 1800s. The bushrangers harassed settlers, miners, the Aboriginal people. They committed robbery, arson, and murder. Bushrangers' activities are a large part of Australian history and folklore. From 1789 until the 1850s, bushrangers were escaped prisoners. The first bushranger was John Caesar. He arrived in Australia on the First Fleet and soon escaped into the bush. After the 1850s, bushrangers were mostly free settlers who were on the run from the law. Quote, in 1869, 14-year-old Kelly met Irish-born Harry Power with the alias of Henry Johnson, a transported convict who had turned to bushranging, and by May of 1869, Ned had become his bush-ranging protege. In 1870, the pair committed their first series of armed robberies, and police scrambled to find this Power and identify his young accomplice. By the end of April, the press had named Kelly as the culprit, and a few days later, he was captured by police. For the next few years, Kelly would be in and out of jail, in trouble with the law, helping his mom out, back and forth, until 1877, when he joined an organized horse-stealing operation. It's claimed by some members of the group that they had stolen over 280 horses in 1 year. Astonishing. It was the 281st that did them in, though. Ned's brother Dan Kelly was caught stealing a horse, and instead of going to jail, Ned shot the officer in the wrist and fled with Dan into the bush. There would be no going back this time. He was on the run. He would continue stealing and selling stolen goods to support himself and his brother, but this couldn't go on forever, and they knew that. On October 25th of 1878, it all came to a head. By this time, the two had turned into a gang of 4. Ned and his brother Dan Kelly, a man named Joe Byrne, and Dan's friend Steve Hart. The police had finally caught up with these 4 and cornered them at a place called Wombat Ranges near the head of the King River. Quote, on October 25th, 1878, 2 mounted police parties were dispatched to search for them. One party, consisting of Sergeant Michael Kennedy and constables Michael Scanlon, Thomas Lonigan, and Thomas McIntyre, camped overnight in an abandoned mining site at Stringy Bark Creek, about 25 miles north of Mansfield. They were unaware that they were only 1.5 miles from the Kelly gang's hideout and that Ned had been tracking them. On the following morning, Constables Kennedy and Scanlon went out scouting while McIntyre and Lonigan remained at the camp. At about 5 p.m., the 4 members of the Kelly gang emerged from the bush and ordered the 2 policemen in the camp to surrender and give up their arms. According to McIntyre, Lonigan made a motion to draw his revolver and ran for the cover of a tree a few yards away. Ned immediately shot Lonigan, killing him. According to Ned, Lonigan had ducked behind a fallen tree, and Ned shot him as he raised his head to fire. So we've got 2 countering stories. Then, the Kelly gang questioned the alive McIntyre and armed themselves with the policeman's shotgun and revolvers. At about 5:30 p.m., Kennedy and Scanlon returned on horseback, while the Kelly 4 hid themselves. According to McIntyre, he started to approach Kennedy, but before he uttered a word, the gang jumped out and ordered the police to give up their arms. Kennedy, instinctively, tried to unclip his gun holster, and shots were fired. Meanwhile, Scanlon dismounted his horse and was shot while trying to unsling his rifle. McIntyre stated that Scanlon did not have enough time to fire a shot, while according to Ned, Scanlon fired first, and Ned shot him as he tried to fire again. Scanlon died soon after. Okay, again, 2 differing accounts of the story. But Kennedy had gotten off his horse, and according to McIntyre, he tried to surrender without firing a shot, but the gang continued shooting at him. According to Ned Kelly, Kennedy hid behind a tree and started firing back. Kennedy then retreated into the bush, where Ned and Dan pursued him for almost a mile, exchanging gunfire with the sergeant, before Ned shot him in the right side. According to Ned, Kennedy then turned around to face him, and Ned shot him in the chest with his shotgun, not realizing that Kennedy had dropped his revolver and was trying to surrender. In the exchange of gunfire and or a chase, McIntyre, who was still unarmed and unharmed, mounted Kennedy's horse and was able to escape. He reached the Mansfield police station the following day, and a search party quickly found the bodies of Lonigan and Scanlon, whereas Kennedy's body was found 2 days later, end quote. The Kelly gang had barely escaped with their lives, and as a result, were now labeled outlaws, and could be shot on sight anywhere. Plus, a reward of £2,000 was issued for each member of their party. It was undeniable now that another standoff would ensue. It was just a matter of time. With the police on their tail, the Kelly gang planned to hole up in a small town named Glenrowan and essentially have it out with the law at large. They took cover in a small hotel atop of a hill and waited. Quote, the 4 outlaws positioned themselves in the shadow of the veranda in the front of the hotel and opened fire when the police were about 30 yards away in the moonlight. The police returned fire and about 100 to 150 shots were fired in 15 minutes. Ned was wounded in the left hand and arm and his right foot. Byrne was shot in the leg and retreated into the hotel. Kelly, who was bleeding heavily from his wounds, retreated behind the hotel and made his way into the bush. Police surrounded the hotel throughout the night, and the firing continued intermittently. At about 5 a.m., Byrne was fatally shot in the groin while making a toast to the 4 of them. Between 5:30 and 7 a.m., police reinforcements arrived, taking the police contingent to about 40 total. Seriously wounded, Kelly laid in the bush for most of the night. At about 7 a.m., dressed in his armor and armed with 3 handguns, he came out of the bush and attacked the police from the rear. There's images or drawings of him, and he looked like that guy that yells, "Pan shot! Oh, pan shot!" If you know what I'm talking about, that's all I got. I can't explain it any further. Police returned fire as Kelly moved towards the hotel, staggering from his injuries, the weight of his armor, and the impact of the bullets on the plate of iron, which he would later describe as like blows from a man's fist. One officer brought Ned down with 2 shotgun blasts to his unprotected legs and thighs. Ned was disarmed and carried away to the railway station, where a doctor attended to his injuries. He was later found to have more than 28 wounds, including serious gunshot wounds to his left elbow and right foot, multiple less serious gunshot wounds, and cuts and abrasions from his own armor, end quote. As for the other 3 men, police eventually set the hotel on fire, hoping to smoke them out. However, the next day, all 3 bodies were pulled from the wreckage. It's uncertain if they had been killed by police, killed by themselves, or the fire. Most of them had gunshot wounds, scratches, a whole number of things wrong with them when they were pulled out of that wrecked building. The only survivor, Ned Kelly, stood trial on October 19th of 1880 in Melbourne before Sir Redmond Barry and was convicted of the willful murder of Lonigan and sentenced to death by hanging. In the week leading up to his execution, thousands turned out at street rallies across Melbourne demanding a reprieve for him, and on November 8th, a petition for clemency with over 32,000 signatures, some of which were very suspicious, was presented to the governor's private secretary. However, the executive council announced soon after that the hanging would proceed as scheduled. At 9 a.m. on November 11th, Kelly's ankle shackles were removed and he was led to the gallows, and before 10 a.m., he was pronounced dead. His last words have been argued about over the years, but my favorite, such is life. Quote, to many Australians, Ned Kelly, the son of poor Irish Catholics, was a heroic anti-establishment figure who fought corrupt British colonists in the 19th century. To others, he was a vicious thug who murdered 3 police officers. His body was put into a wooden box and dumped into a mass grave with the corpses of other prisoners. And it wasn't until 2010 that DNA testing finally confirmed the identity of Kelly's remains. End quote. And that, my friends, is the remarkable story of Ned Kelly, Australia's most infamous bushranger. Lover of the bush. Why are all the cool professions extinct? I would kill to be a bushranger, eating kangaroo jerky and getting shot in the pots and pans. I know many of you have probably heard the Legend of Ned Kelly before, but I hadn't, or I had forgotten of it, and I felt I should share. I just hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you all again for listening. Wouldn't be here without you. If you'd like, stick around for a bonus story after the music. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Alright, fuckers. In the last few weeks, I have found some uplifting stories, helpful organizations to highlight, generally more positive things. Today's not that. Titled, Kentucky Woman Goes on a Shooting Rampage. Written by Stephanie Price of Fox News. And Stephanie Price, well, Stephanie is spelled like Stephen with a PH and then a Y. Stephenny. Has anybody else seen anything like that before? I want to call her Stephanie, or I keep saying Persephone in my head for some reason. Anyways, quote, a Kentucky woman went on a wild shooting rampage, killing her husband and gunning down her own sister before she was killed by her brother in a shootout. Angela Gosser, 56, is accused of driving to her brother's house on Friday, May 3rd, in Jamestown with a gun and forcing her way into the home. Her brother, Daryl Wilson, who was 58, was home at the time, and according to a press release, he had a gun too. Dun dun. Police said that the two siblings got into a shootout that ended with Angela dead. Wilson was injured and taken to a hospital with life-threatening injuries. But the extent of her crime spree, according to police, only became apparent when authorities were called to her sister's home, Jennifer Wilson, for a welfare check. Jennifer's family said they weren't able to get in touch with her and were concerned for her safety. When authorities arrived at the home in Russell County, they made a grisly discovery. Troopers and deputies found Jennifer sitting in the driver's seat of her Toyota Camry with apparent fatal gunshot wounds to the head. Police said that they believe before the incident at her brother's house, Angela came across Jennifer Wilson, shot her multiple times through the car's passenger side, and left her for dead. According to one newspaper, Gosser's husband, Larry Gosser, was also found shot and killed on Friday evening. Larry Gosser was a retired sergeant with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Service after 16 years of service. Police said that Larry was working on a tree on his property in western Pulaski County when his wife opened fire on him, killing him. Pulaski County Sheriff Bobby Jones told a news station, "Right now, that is still open for investigation. We are still working with detectives and looking for leads. They are back there working to find the end of it." According to his obituary, Larry Gosser was an avid fisherman and hunter who loved the outdoors, loved his animals, and most of all, loved spending time with his family and friends. Investigators have not yet announced a motive for the murders. End quote. I need to know why. After 56 years, what changed? I don't want to assume anything at all or put anything negative out there, but did she just snap? Was it a build-up? Please do not let me forget about this story and updating it later on. I just hope for a speedy recovery for Daryl. Alrighty, I think that'll about do it today, folks. Again, I appreciate each and every one of your eardrums. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.